good evening. I'm Melisa Idris.
And I'm Sharaad Kuttan.
You're watching Consider This, the show where we want you to consider and then reconsider what you know of the news of the day. Schools nationwide are now closed for the rest of the year following the re-implementation of the CMCO in most states. Now, these long-term school closures will exact a high cost in students' learning outcomes and their well-being. Are these trade-offs, the trade-offs of the COVID-19 management policy, is that too high a price to pay for Malaysia's 1.7 million students? Tonight on the show, we will be speaking to several educationists for their thoughts on the matter. Harry Tan joins us now. He is the Secretary General of the National Union of the Teaching Profession for Peninsular Malaysia, or NUTP. Harry, good evening. Now, what are your thoughts on the recently announced nationwide school closure? Was this an expected move? Was it one that was welcomed?
The school closures definitely will impact not only the students, parents and teachers, but society at large. They need the schools to be open. There will be anxieties among the students and parents and teachers, as this is all their immediate concern.
Harry, you know, the question that a lot of us have is, can't schools be made safe in terms of the SOPs, in terms of, reducing the possibility of infection? Isn't that a better thing, to find some sort of middle ground where we strengthen the SOPs in schools rather than close schools down entirely?
Well, if you look at it, what is our priority here? Are we talking about education, or are we talking about safety per se? So if you are to compare the two head on, definitely we have to choose safety, because the safety of everybody in the system must be of utmost priority, must be our utmost priority. Without that, there will be other related problems that may arise.
Yes, I agree with that. Safety comes first for sure, and the good of the collective over the good of one or any one group. But I'm wondering whether closure of schools is the only tool to be using. Surely there are other measures that we can think of, we can implement first that could ensure safety. Lockdowns and closures of schools are not necessarily the only thing that can ensure safety, right?
To me, it's not true, because you are talking about in a normal circumstance. However, this is different. We are under attack by COVID-19. It is a pandemic. So it's not a path that we have walked before. There are many turns and many dangers along the way that is lurking around the corners. So this to us, whatever it is, the safety is always the utmost priority. And the closures of the school is a circuit breaker. So to make sure that we are still around to be able to do whatever we do after the rain or bombs and bullets is over.
I hear what you're saying. I'm just wondering if I could follow up on Sharaad's question. We understand that teachers and school administrators have done so much to try to get schools ready for learning within physical distancing measures. Have those SOPs failed if it necessitates the closure of schools?
I wouldn't say that the SOPs have failed. It's just that the attack by the unrelentless and unseen enemy is getting from bad to worse. Look at the time when we were undergoing the NCO period from March till June. All right, the figures were just bearable. But nowadays it's like in the 3 digits and in the 4 digits. And fatalities today that we are seeing, for today itself, there are 6 fatalities, and the number of fatalities is growing. So this is something that I think everybody should ponder upon, that this is no normal circumstance that we are facing. We are actually facing an all-out attack by an enemy that we all do not know.
Okay, Harry, I appreciate the language, but the metaphors might be a little misplaced. I mean, if you look at and disaggregate the numbers, there are concentrations in terms of rates of infection, the higher in Sabah, and they account for much of the numbers. But in the peninsula, that's not necessarily true. So we have a one-size-fits-all policy with these school closures that might actually not make sense in terms of the actual numbers per locality. And we also know that young people, students, in many ways are not the most vulnerable population in terms of the infection. So to what extent are we using science to drive this policy? Is it too blunt a tool, this nationwide, or at least nationwide school closures?
I cannot speak on behalf of the authorities. I don't have the statistics. I don't have the projected figures of who are going to be affected and so on and so forth. But as in any war, as in any emergency situation, there should be only one general. And when the general says something, all of us must follow, because, I mean, if taking a leaf from history, we are under attack. And when we are under attack, our immediate concern is safety. So we do not want, or we cannot allow any room for any doubts from whatever section of the society to question that their safety is, put aside.
Sure. Okay, Harry, if I may pivot the conversation to home-based learning, I want to ask you what your observations have been about how effective home-based learning has been. We've had several months of when students have had to do this. Can you say that students are learning using this method? Has it impacted students' learning?
All right. Has it impacted learning? Yes, definitely. But whether it's successful or not, as I said earlier, we are reacting and we are not really planning, because there are still many challenges unfolding each day. So to comment on the success or the failures of home-based learning is totally unfair at this juncture of time.
Harry, I mean, you talk about generals and a command structure, but this is it might seem like a war, but it isn't a war, and we are a democracy, and conversations need to continue. Within the teaching profession, is everybody in agreement, or is there in fact a conversation happening within your profession about the best possible way forward?
All right, I beg to differ. Many people are saying that this is not war because it's different. To me, it's a different kind of war. But if you were to take the comparison, the similarities, there are roadblocks, there are casualties, there are attacks. The hospitals are filled up with patients or casualties, and then there is no cure and at the moment for this particular attack. So it's basically the same. It's just that it's different because you don't hear the bombs exploding, you don't hear the bullets firing at you. But basically, we are at war. And if you look at the whole world, it's like the whole world is under attack. The figures are going, the casualties are mounting. So how can you tell me that this is not a war?
Can I ask you, Harry, about how the teachers are feeling? How much pressure are teachers under to complete this year's syllabus, given despite the school closures and given the home-based learning?
Even before the pandemic, the teachers are always under the watchful eyes of the parents and all stakeholders who pile pressure upon the teachers to ensure the best for the students. So it is no different this time. It's just that the stage is different, the script is different, but everybody is looking to the teachers to ensure that their children have the best possible education available.
Harry, thank you so much for joining us on the show tonight. We appreciate your time. We're going to take a quick break here on Consider This, but we will be back with more speaking to other educationists. Stay tuned. Hello, you're watching Consider This. I'm Melisa Idris. With me is Sharaad Kuttan. Let's continue our conversation about the closure of schools. Cheryl Fernando is the Country Director of pemimpin GSL Malaysia, which is an organisation focused on improving leadership in schools. Cheryl, what have we learned so far about the impact of school closures on children's learning from these past few months? And I think more importantly, the question should also be, what is it that we don't yet know?
I think what we've learned so far, or at least what I've seen with the schools that I've worked with, is that our teachers are really good at using technology and being very creative on how best to reach their students. If at the first phase they were coping, I think right now they are definitely managing continuity, and they are more comfortable with using technology and using it to the best of their ability. I think what we don't know is really how can we deal with dropouts. I think we cannot deny that there are many students who are now choosing to go to work and might drop out of school. So what can we do to ensure that our students continue learning? I think this is something that we still don't know.
Cheryl, this is interesting. You're saying you're judging this from the schools that you're looking at. What are you hearing beyond that particular cohort of schools, especially when we think of rural schools or schools where many of the kids come from poor families, or the teachers are less resourced?
I think, so even because a lot of the schools that we work with are in KL, the urban poor schools, definitely, I think, like I mentioned just now, the biggest problem will be dropouts. A lot of the students in Form 5, what the teachers are finding is that they didn't come back after the first MCO because a lot of them chose to work and to support their families instead of going to school. So I think that was something that the school was really struggling to deal with. And in terms of resources, I think teachers are doing whatever they can, trying out different methods and ways to support their students and to reach out to them, whether it is leaving learning packs with the guards for parents to come and pick up, or delivering this homework to student houses.
So speaking about that, I know that teachers have been very creative or trying to figure out, ways to get around school closures and to facilitate home-based learning. And I'm wondering whether, challenges of devices and connectivity and the digital divide, all of that has been spoken about. I'm very curious to know about, despite all these different measures of, teaching through WhatsApp, teaching through notes, how much are children, our students, really absorbing of their learning from home-based learning? How much are they really retaining from just reading notes without, proper face-to-face instruction?
Yeah, I think, so definitely home-based learning, the whole thing is very much a work in progress. There are a lot of teething issues. It will take time to replace face-to-face learning. I think a lot of it stems from the fact that our students, even pre-pandemic, they were very used to one way of teaching, which is obtaining the information from the teacher. And especially in primary school and secondary school, we don't see a lot of independent learners. And this is not exclusive to Malaysia, so this problem is really worldwide. But home-based learning now requires students to be independent learners, pace their own studying at a very young age. So it's going to take a while for them to get used to this. And I read something just now which really struck me. So a leaky roof is a small problem on a sunny day, but a big problem on a rainy day. So this pandemic is not just a rainy day for our students in the low and middle income countries. It's like a 100-year flood for them. So the learning loss is going to be huge when the pandemic is over.
Cheryl, you point to not so much the failure of schools or teaching or new methods when it comes to dropouts. The dropout situation really is about the failure of support for families, right? For livelihoods, and that is what the dropout is a symptom of. I know there's talk about how kids are bored, but I doubt that's the reason why they're being pushed into the workforce. What else could schools do to address the dropout problem because it's actually in some ways outside their remit? So I'm just trying to figure out what kind of support you're getting for that dropout issue.
So in a few schools that we work with, what they're doing is that they're working closely with the school counselor to identify these students and their families and to see how they can provide income, provide food for their families throughout the lockdown period. So at least the students will not have to go out and work. So So these are some of the things that the schools are proactively doing. And I think throughout this pandemic, we've seen especially school leaders more than ever acting like community leaders, where they're taking on all these responsibilities. Like you said just now, it's not in their locus of control, but they're still doing it because they want students to stay in school. So I think one of the few things that I've seen is working with the school counsellor to get the students back to learning.
I see. It's quite interesting. Just before we had you on the line, we spoke to Harry Tan of NUTP, and he mentioned that because of this pandemic, a lot of the policies had also been about reacting to COVID-19 and the outbreak of this pandemic, rather than kind of long-term planning. I'm wondering, since you work with school leaders, Cheryl, whether that is still the case. Are school leaders still reacting to COVID-19 measures, or has planning materialized? Is planning being put into place?
I think definitely there is no playbook for pandemic in any education system, and even with the school leaders that we work with. But what they are trying to do is now, knowing that, okay, until December schools will be closed, schools will be starting in January, what can they do now to plan for their students? I think one of the good things that has happened is that they are going through this, they are adjusting the curriculum. So they are picking out parts of the curriculum that is most vital for the students, so that the teachers are not burdened to finish the syllabus. So by doing this, we just pinpoint on the areas that are most important for students to learn, and then just help them with that throughout the year.
School leaders school leaders are empowered to do that at a school level. They're empowered to tailor the curriculum based on the needs of their students and teachers?
So this is a district effort. It's called Penjajaran Semula Curriculum. So I think every school is doing it to make sure that at least they will finish the year with some sort of learning. Yeah, so a lot of schools are actually doing that at the district level and state level.
Right, Cheryl, one of the big questions, because for this show, is whether this school closure is too blunt an instrument, too much, a kind of one-size-fits-all type of solution for the current crisis. Can schools be secured in terms of the pandemic and allow for students to actually still learn within their environment, or is that not really possible? What's your sense of it?
Yeah, so I was researching and just seeing how other countries do it. I think one of the examples that I really like, and I wish that maybe Malaysia can explore, is this bubble system. So what they do is that kids are fixed in this bubble of, say, 15 students and 2 teachers, and they never move from their bubble, so they don't communicate with any other student or any other teacher. So in the event, if there is a positive case in the bubble, then this bubble quarantines instead of the whole school shutting down. So there are actually lots of very creative ways that we can explore to ensure school continues and learning continues. I think most importantly, I know a few teachers were talking about how at least the exam classes should have been left open, or maybe from 5 and standard 6. So there are different ways, I think, of exploring this rather than a blanket, like closing all schools. Yeah.
Definitely an interesting suggestion. Thank you for highlighting that, Cheryl. Appreciate your insights and your time tonight. We're going to take another quick break. We'll be back with more. Stay tuned to Consider This. Hi, thank you for staying with Sharaad and I on Consider This. Our next educationist joining us tonight to discuss this issue is Professor Ganakumaran Subramaniam, Head of the School of Education at University of Nottingham, Malaysia. Gana, from a pedagogical point of view, I'm wondering which cohort of this K-12 school year do you think is likely to be most affected by the school closures or most disadvantaged by the school closures? I'm wondering because I'm thinking about whether younger students are likely to be more affected, or is it the older exam year students that will be? What do you think?
I think it's not something related to age. I think, that there are going to be people disadvantaged right across the spectrum. It's more likely to be related to students who are,
higher achievers and probably have more support, as opposed to those who are lower achievers and require more support. So these are the students who are going to be, disadvantaged greatly. So it's going to be right across from as early as, perhaps even preschool, right up to, Form 5 and Form 6 students. So the students who are going to be most disadvantaged are the ones who are, who need the additional support, who need the in-person support, and the different learning or teaching approaches that teachers can provide.
Gana, to what extent does this this distinction that you make also map onto the home conditions or domestic conditions, the ability for parents to step up to the plate, provide guidance or structures for their children, and parents who perhaps are too busy, and I know this is both of working class and middle class parents, but they're too busy in fact to provide some sort of supplemental structures to help their kids through this particular period?
Okay, we did, at the University of Nottingham, we actually did a study quite recently. Some colleagues of mine and I, we did a study, and we assessed how teachers perceived, teaching and learning to have taken place during school closure. And one of the things that we found was that the data suggests that in less than 20% of homes, parents were able to provide support for the students. For many reasons, for some reasons it's time. For others could be because of available of resources, or having to share the resources with their children. And we must understand that in some situations, parents are working; they're also working online. But in other situations, that the resources, the technology is being shared by more than one child at home. And, at home there is just one device perhaps, or maybe two devices that need to be shared. So there's a lot of issues that we found, inhibited or sort of prohibited learning from taking place, more in a better way.
So what would you recommend then? I mean, are there ways around this? Are there ways to, I guess, get over some of the challenges? If the first part of the problem is identifying the problem. Once we understand the challenges of home-based learning, what can we do to overcome it? Do you have any recommendations or proposals at this point?
Okay, there are. I mean, in countries they have tried different models. We too have tried different models. We have tried live online classes. For students who can access internet and who can engage in live classes online. But we also have tried sending students recorded videos and materials to them. We in some situations, and my colleagues who teach in schools tell me that in some situations, we have prepared modules and we try and get these modules to students in remote areas, hoping that they would actually work on these modules. Unfortunately, the problem is that I think we need to look at how to prepare our students. At the moment, we are thinking of how we can do the job, right? Okay, what are the approaches that we can use? But I think very little effort has gone into preparing the learners and perhaps getting in the buy-in from family and community to support, learning to be sustained, at home, whatever model that we use. It is not a problem that we are in Malaysia facing, but I think it's a problem a lot of countries are facing, but I think we need to begin to, take that next step. Rather than look at just working with schools, but how can we get the community involved? How can we get parents involved? How can we get students, to take greater responsibility of what they do?
I mean, Gana, I know that you were once a teacher in the school system, and as anybody who's been in a classroom observed it, we know kids are very fidgety. We know that part of the thing that teachers do is not just impart information, they are there guiding the students and disciplining them, and that's something that obviously is going to disappear in a home-based situation unless you have a parent that plays that surrogate teacher role. So the question that we want to ask, and the big question is, did the government go too far in terms of school closures? Was this too, kind of an approach that was kind of a one-size-fits-all for all schools across the country, when we could have tried something that was in between, a sweet spot where we could have managed both safety and learning?
I think what we tried, when we reopened schools sometime in June, was that, we actually, attempted to go back to exactly the way, how it was, perhaps with a bit of tweaking here and there. And you're right. I think we could have tried something else. We could have been a little bit more focused in terms of how we approach teaching and learning. We could have focused fundamentally on the core subject and tried to, be flexible around timetabling. For instance, and I was talking to a colleague of mine at the university this morning, and one of the suggestions was that perhaps one day could be assigned to 2 subjects. Students would go in and they would, because they need to catch up. There's a huge amount, to catch up in terms of what the students need to achieve. So to focus on the core subject, to work with, perhaps a different model of teaching and learning in school. And there are many examples that we could have used. And you're right, we could have been, could have taken, more effort to look at health and safety. But having said all of this, I have first-hand experience in this. And when schools reopened in June, many parents were still very reluctant to send their children to school. There was a huge amount of anxiety. Right. And this anxiety continued right through, even, throughout the period of schools being opened. I think at the early stages, perhaps 30% of the students went to school. Right. And then, towards the middle, when things seemed a little calmer, you saw maybe perhaps up to 80% of students returning to school. Depending on the school and the location. Sure. And towards the end, this began to drop again when the cases started to increase. So it is also the public, it's also what the public feels. We could have kept school open, but if nobody went to school, then what is the point?
Well, Gana, thank you. Thank you for those excellent points that you've made. You've given us a lot to think about tonight. Thank you. We appreciate your time. That's all we have for you on this episode of Consider This. I'm Melisa Idris.
And I'm Sharaad Kuttan, signing off for the evening.
Thank you so much for watching, and good night.